Let's start with the first session. And Bart has his slide already ready, so let's fly in there.
Good morning, everybody. So in the breakout room of Work Package 4, there was not too many people yesterday, so we decided to have a short presentation this morning. And yes, so your discussion items are very welcome after this short presentation. I got some input, some slides from Matthias Steinparzer, who is a PhD candidate on this work package at Boku, and Loïc Gillereau, who you met also yesterday, who is a PhD at KU Leuven and UGent on work package 2 and 5. But in work package 5, which is about synthesis, these issues are coming back. Okay. Yeah, this is a slide that Aletta showed already yesterday. So we all know that particulate matter is really a big issue worldwide in many countries, and is a cause of serious health problems worldwide. So it is an issue, and we also know that green areas and especially trees can filter particulate matter and so mitigate these effects. The question is now if mixture matters. So if by mixing tree species we can improve the mitigating effect on particulate matter. And there's not so much research on that, but what we know for sure is that the three-dimensional structure of trees is really essential to filter particulate matter. So the leaf area index is the amount or the area of leaves for one unit of area of land. That's very determining. And also the canopy structure, how are these leaves organized? And the clumping of these leaves in how far they are organized to be an efficient filter. And yeah, there's a whole number of traits that will affect this PM absorption. The surface roughness of the canopy of a forest, the presence of stomata, trichomes, these are the hairs on the leaves, grooves, or waxes, leaf shape, and so on. So structures at different scales. Based on the information we have, I tried to minimize this. Yeah, that's better. We tried to build a theoretical model where it becomes clear that tree identity, so which type of species, span density, tree species diversity, and tree height all affect the leaf area index and the canopy roughness. And they will affect so the filtering capacity, so will determine the effectiveness of the filter of trees, and will lead to a certain level of filtering which will have a health outcome. So that relates to the KICAS classification of ecosystem services to this ecosystem service 2112, which is about filtration, sequestration, storage, and so on. Then a word that's all about particulate matter. Let's say something about, sorry, for another reason, now it's moving. Say something about pollen. Pollen is also a fine particulate matter, but it's fine particulate matter which is produced by plants, by trees and grasses. And there's often a belief that people would have allergies for pollen, they need to avoid green spaces. And there's recent research which contradicts that. So even during pollen season, contact with nature can be beneficial for people. And I want to explain you a bit the reason for that. And there's two recent researches that took place by colleagues of mine in my division. First is a static research, which looked at self-reported distress by tree pollen allergy patients. And from this large study all over Belgium, we learned that the amount of green environment around the place where people live, the amount of physical activity they have a negative effect on this distress, and the presence of allergenic trees and active smoking have a positive effect on their distress. So it shows that people living in a more green environment suffer less from this distress if they are so pollen allergic patients. And the second study is a more dynamic study. So it followed with GPS technology the movements, the daily movements of people with pollen allergy, and they also made their own symptom diary. And from this study that really followed where people were passing to their work and going on a walk or on sports and so on. This more dynamic study showed again that the presence of grassland and forests in the environment where people come have a negative effect on the severeness of their allergy symptoms, and that the presence of allergenic trees, in this case betula trees and pollen, but also the overall level of air pollution has a positive effect on their allergy symptoms. So again, here we see that the overall presence of nature and green elements where people come have a mitigating, improving effect on their symptoms. And that suggests so that tree species diversity plays a role here. And so if in a mixture we can decrease the allergenic pollen, but increase the overall mixture of what we have in the canopy, we get to an improvement. So the pollen model that we created, the theoretical model, is in fact the same as for the particulate matter, with that difference that, of course, there's also a disservice. Mixed forest or green elements can have a certain probability of presence of allergenic species, which of course will create a negative health outcome. But all the other elements stand, and so we expect that more mixture, more stand density, effective filtering species can lead to improved filtering capacity and reduced pollen through filtration. I think that's enough. I can stop sharing. And of course, your questions and remarks are very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for this interesting presentation, because we also have with our patients the discussion, shall I go in the forest when I have an allergy to birch trees, for example? And this is a really good knowledge right now that you gained, and so we can ask or answer this question with sound results. This is very good for us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this appreciation. I think we also learned something important here for the management of green spaces, so that indeed trying to decrease the share of allergenic species is an important point of attention, but so that the creation of overall mixture leads to a better performance of green spaces indeed.
Mm-hmm. But I have a question. When someone has a grass or weed allergy, then, because you were saying in your presentation that grassland is better than urban areas because of the pollutions, and can imagine that there might be a difference?
Well, this study was specifically focusing on pollen allergies of birds, of betula. And so we saw that the presence of more trees or more forest and more grasslands mitigated the effects of the birch allergy. Of course, grass also produces pollen and pollen allergies in another season of the year. But I would guess there's no studies so far, but probably also in grasslands there's diversity, and there are grassland species with more and less pollen allergy problems. But mixed grasslands probably also have this mitigating effect.
This would be a nice study
certainly
too.
More research to be done. Yes.
Thank you.
Well, may I add something? Years ago, I read that beech betula has more aggressive pollen if they have more distress, if they are closer to a road. So this may be another explanation, that the quality of the pollen may be different depending where the tree is living. A tree with distress has more aggressive pollen. But I wanted to know, how did you measure the reduction of the dust of the particles in the air? How did you do that?
Yeah, so far, well, there is literature on the filtering capacity of trees, and well, I think we still lag there, but studies come to reductions of 20–30%. And there's also a model that was developed a few years ago that predicts for a certain forest cover, certain distribution of trees and so on, how much pollen reduction do you have? Important to know is that not everything is one. You have a certain sedimentation of pollen, pollen or particulate matter in general on trees, but there's always a certain percentage of release again. So what is sedimented can also lose again. That depends on rainfall patterns. If there's a long period without rainfall, what is sedimented on leaves can get re-emitted into the atmosphere. I have now a new PhD study with the eddy covariance technology, where we can really, at the top of a forest canopy, measure the exchange over a whole year in the amount of particulate matter. So how many kilos or tons per hectare are absorbed by the canopy, and how much is released. There's so far very little studies like that, and yeah, we are very anxiously waiting for more results on that. Even more complex is also that trees and forests produce certain particulate matters themselves.
Yeah, hi Bart. Thanks for this very interesting talk. I was just wondering, I mean, I think you said as a mechanism, you suggest the filtering of the forests, right? So the filtering out of pollen. But I was just wondering, because I came across an article that also said that the immune system is also elevated or like improving when walking in forests. So do you think that there could also be like a more, just medicinal explanation for this that you might also need to take into account?
Yes, indeed. If we see from these results that the presence of trees and green has a mitigating effect on allergies, I think there's this direct physical effect that trees can filter pollen and particulate matter, but I'm sure there's all these other effects as well. All the effects that we are studying in the other work packages, the effects of green on the mental health, on overall physical condition, etc., etc. So yes, I fully agree that these other elements play as well.
Can you talk a bit about the species that are relevant? So in general, if we think about this kind of issues, it's mainly about hazel, about birch, so a comparatively small list of species that is often mentioned in this context. Should the list be longer, or is it are any conifers a problem, for example?
Yeah, there's a few species which cause quite some trouble because they have a peak flowering. Their pollen is very allergenic, and we know birch and hazel, but the list of potentially allergenic species is much longer. There's also platanus or oak trees. Well, I don't know the complete list by heart, but the list is quite long, and then it depends. There's also species which cause more rarely allergenic patterns, depending on also on the persons. I think conifer pollen is in general less allergenic than broadleafed. And then of course there's other plants. There's grasses. In the United States they have this amaranthus, which is extremely allergenic and which starts to be an invasive weed in Southern Europe as well. So it's a point of attention to keep this amaranthus under control. I'm thinking now, it's not amaranthus. Well, never mind. I can look it up. Ambrosia, yeah. Thank you, Helge. Ambrosia, exactly. So yes, quite a difference in species, but you will see in forest or in green space management, it will never be possible to manage to eliminate all allergenic species. And so the option of creating mixture is a much better one. By a mixture, anyway, you decrease the share of potentially allergenic species, and you get this mixture effects.
I think the negative impact of grasslands in Belgium might be due to the fact that 99% of the Belgium grasslands might be mown before they come to flower. So they are heavily used. So we don't expect a lot of pollen from such type of land use. But I have also two questions. One is about the desensibilization. So might it be that these less allergic tree species like oak or beech might desensibilize people for other types of pollen like birch and hazel? In this case, diversity of a forest would have a positive effect if other species are included there. And we know that this is a therapy to expose people to the allergic compounds that are not so harmful. So it might work exactly the other way around. Just an idea. My second question is, how does climate change interfere with these species? So we see a lot of birch dying in eastern Germany at the moment because of the drought. And this might alleviate the problem, or is it increasing? What is your expectation?
All interesting questions, and I have no answer on it. Indeed, I think there can be very complex interactions between species, and it might indeed be that slightly allergenic species train our system and avoid that we get really serious allergies. So yeah, I think that's up to medical research to increase our understanding of that. But indeed, we can expect that there's real species interaction and certain facilitation effects that we can expect by mixtures. Climate change effects. Yes, indeed, we will have species shifts. and the species shifts will have an influence on the allergenic effect of species communities if communities change. But yes, I think I have not seen any research looking into that.
Please.
Thank you. It's not really a question. It's something we observe. So when trees are under stress, they tend to focus on reproduction because most wild plants, the most important thing is reproduction. So even when under stress and they have less energy than usual, they tend to reproduct. So that might be the answer for birches on roads to produce a lot of pollen. That might be the answer to birches in Eastern Germany to produce a lot of pollen. And yeah, so this is a cycle, but I'm not sure what to do about it. And of course, reproduction uses a lot of energy, and so the stress most of the times even increases by this reproduction. So it's like a cycle that they are not able to come out of. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good comment. Thank you.
Yeah, so we are on the first slide, and we had arranged this in these 4 questions, and I will shortly summarize that. And like you can complement that, of course. And I have to say that also Loic arranged this overnight and added the additional notes on that. So thanks for that a lot. So our first question was what was important to know, and it really comes down that we have to evaluate the non-timber forest products more. That's the first column here, where the question is whether we can express that as money as well. And we come back to that on the 4th slide with the gaps. We also found that there is not enough information on the non-forest products. So are they edible? What can be picked? How much can be picked? And so, and we found that it would be very useful to have more information on that. So either through the web or also to develop educational programs to inform people, in particular school kids. We then focused also on microclimate, but found out that microclimate is a bit of a side effect. Yeah, so the foresters optimize their timber production and they need not too much light, but not completely darkness. And for that reason, this is not maximizing leaf area index, which would be good for microclimate regulation, but something in between. And this microclimate regulation is a side product. The next slide was about the legal issues. This was done mostly from the German perspective. We have to apologize for that, but there are mostly German practitioners among us. So at least in Germany, we feel that we have all rules in place, but sometimes they're not implemented and quite often they are simply not controlled for. In German, Vollzugsdefizit. And we also found that these regulations, so also it's desirable to have it general, that this is very difficult to be done. Yeah, so deregulation might things even more difficult. And also we found that these regulations are often site-specific, yeah? Adapted to the nature reserve or must be adaptable to the year's condition and so on. Nevertheless, we found it useful that persons, so rangers as in national parks, might inform people about what to pick and about the regulations, also maybe guiding them to where they can find fruits or what they can done. So it would be really good to have people there. And of course, at the moment, the current personal situation does not allow that. They have other things to do. Our third topic was about ideas for implementation. And this was mainly around forest therapy. Yeah? So we thought that forest therapists would be a nice new profession in the future, and it needs study programs. So far, we have only advanced training, so after having the first degree, so in German Weiterbildung, but it would be great to make this a proper profession, maybe establishing own study programs. And then we thought about who might pay for that. And of course, it comes immediately to the health insurance companies, who at the moment prefer to pay for the cure than for the prevention. But this might change. So that's one of the, I think, main outcomes where we would think our results might be useful for. So contacting the insurance companies is one of the big outcomes, I think, of our working group. Again, then we have legal issues. We could also have put that in the previous slide. So what happens if you go out with a group of people into the forest? Are they insured or not? And again, there's a lot of idiosyncrasy in there that might have been solved. But this was just a side discussion. And our final slide is the blind spots, what is missing. And as I said before, we need to have all these ecosystem services more to be built into the economic models. Yeah? So far we have provisioning the timber production, but we are lacking the valuation of most of the non-timber products so far. And we thought it might be possible to also attach a price to them. And of course, we have the regulating services that might be possible to be evaluated as well, and supporting like nutrient cycle, but the cultural services, and I mean, I would think the non-material benefits for health also belong here, are completely disregarded in these models so far. And of course, they're difficult to capture, but maybe there's a way to simply calculate the saved money for cures in the health system from that. And the overall challenge, and that's my last sentence, is that we now not only have to link it to the presence of forest, but also to forest biodiversity. And this is still a big step, because all what I've said is true for forest in general and does not make any distinction between monocultures and mixed forests.
Thank you for this interesting presentation. The health insurance is a very important task to bring them into the system and to get paid programs. But for this, we need really good studies to evaluate the benefit, the health benefit. Otherwise, they won't pay for any program at all. And this is a lack in Germany. And there are some studies are right now on the way from the Charité, for example. And but this has to be done, and I think there should also be maybe a joint study approach in different locations where we can use different forests at all. And the most important thing is also to describe the forest biodiversity, the forest aesthetic, for example, to combine it with the outcome of the study, of the medical outcome, because this is also a problem that we only have studies where we can see, oh, the blood pressure is going down, I have positive physiological effects, but I have no idea what causes, what kind of forest they have been conducting the study. And this is a big gap. It's a black box, we don't know, and this has to be also done. And also maybe with all the microbiome exposome in the area where they are doing this training, because there's also a strong interconnection between this gut microbiome of the human body with all of the exposome of the microbiome of the environment. And this is a real big package, and with a lot of different perspectives we can take care on. So we will be we will have to do a lot the next years. Thank you.
Thank you for this comment. This really calls for a joint action of people from medicine, from biology, from the social sciences to do it together, like a German collaborative research center. Yeah. Somebody has to do it.
Hand up. Yeah, I'm just going to piggyback a little bit on that comment. As a practitioner, or as somebody who is trying to become a practitioner, I think the most confusing thing for me has been training programs to become a forest bathing guide, and there's also forest therapy, which is not the same thing, I would say, per se. And it is extremely confusing. There are all these, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but there are all these programs, but not many of them. There's no international standard at the moment, and it's very confusing trying to find out what programs offer what. The costs vary widely to be trained in this, and some programs, for example, I think here in Germany, a lot of it is focused on sort of a therapy side, a psychotherapy or a mental health side. From what I can tell, I have not been in those programs, whereas there are other programs that exist that are more focused on the ecology side of things, or eco-literacy and this kind of thing. So the forest ecology. And I personally have not found a competent program that trains somebody in both. I don't know if it exists, and if anybody knows if it exists, please tell me about it. But this is a huge problem. So you're posted about training forest therapists. I would love to know how to do that without having to go through, for example, standard training in a psychology degree and going on to more academic work. I already have a PhD in something else. This is not per se something that interests me. And I just wanted to point that out. This has been a huge obstacle for me personally. How do I get the forest ecology training while also doing the forest bathing guide work?
I think we would fully agree in this working group. You're already one step ahead and ask how this could be done in practice. We only identified the need for it. Yeah? But I completely agree, to have both ecology and psychology included in such a program would be essential.
Maybe I can answer a little bit more insight. I have conducted with an Australian company and first evaluation about 120 person, what kind of topics needs to be included in a forest therapy guide training. And we were evaluating practitioners as also scientists from all over the world. And we set up a short 2 pages different parts we need to address, from the psychological part, from the landscape, aesthetic part of the forest, from the different diseases we can treat, we cannot treat. And since 2 years, we educate Waldgesundheitstrainer, forest health trainer, based on the scientific evidence we know, but also it's also important for us that we train the people in the nature connectedness, because I'm a forest therapy guide from the ANFT, which is deeply connected with the forest. The interconnectedness with the forest is very important, and the research also shows when you step in this interconnectedness, the health parameters also will increase and will become better. So for us, in our education for forest health trainers, it's mainly important to combine both the evidence, the science evidence results from different studies, also to criticize if there's a methodological lack in such studies. For example, Professor Lee, only 12 participants, I can use it for generalization. And this also is combined with this to be in connection with the environment. And this is for us very important. And the feedback of our trainees also tells us that this is really a self-exploration too. It's not only guiding, it's gaining or creating a community with the forest and also with the participants. And this is for me very essential, because we are separated from the nature more and more, and maybe it's more a dangerous situation, nature, than a friendly situation. And we have to take care of this and to deal with this in our training programs.
Offer what I just added a link in the chat. This is one example from Germany. So in Lower Saxony, in Niedersachsen, The state forests only open their forests if the people have a certificate, if they want to offer training courses, and they make sure that only people can offer courses there if they have qualification in the field of health and in forest. And I think this is, well, somehow it's closing the market on the one hand. On the other hand, it makes sure that the two areas are somehow linked. And I think this is really a special offer, and this is really an additional benefit to the people who are interested in forest and health, that they get information and they get additional benefits in two areas.
I'll keep it very short. I think this is really fascinating, and as you said, there are already a lot of training programs and actually programs advertised. I have a question. Is this already been, especially with regard to nature relatedness and other effects, is this already been evaluated? And otherwise, it would be great to catch up afterwards.
To whom is the question?
Yeah,
To me?
if this is directed to me, I cannot answer that.
No,
Out of my depth.
It was to Isla Immich and Ulrich Schrammel.
Maybe I will start. Evaluation of this program has done yes, has done, but more importantly for us, every student or trainee has to write a short thesis about his concept, about his experience about this 6-month training period. And for us, and I think this is the difference to the Saxony program, that we are really focusing on nature connectedness. And this is really a strong focus for us, because this is very beneficial and helpful. And this is, I think, in my view, we are right now the only one who are dealing with this approach. Maybe
just a short additional comment. Yes, there are certificates, but if you compare the field of forest pedagogic, for example, with the field of we are just discussing about, then there's a big difference. So there is a long way to go if you compare these issues. And I think Bernd Nold has his hand up, so he's a specialist in this field, and he knows very well about the possibilities of certificates. So he may be also be able to answer the question.
My presentation, but I also wanted, because I find it such an interesting subject, the non-timber products about forestry, and we don't think about the forest owner. So we think about the therapist and about the markets, but how can a forest owner really profit from health? How can he profit from the providence of cleaner water, of filtration from pollen? So we also, I just wanted to say that the forest administrations focus mainly on timber products, and it needs maybe a completely changed understanding of the importance and the effects of forest in general. And that needs another discussion. How can be forest owners supported if we think about biodiversity or other aspects, and also about the health aspects?
And then Bernd, I used the term again of this non-timber forest product. So it's something like the official term that is used by the FAO and so on. So it's a correct term, but anyhow, words are somehow important. And if we wish to change something, and if we believe in a transformation, as Bernd just did in the forest services, in the field of the business of forest owners, then I think that the language is important, and a positive term and not a negative one or a negotiation would be very helpful. So if we just talk about non-timber, it will always be the rest. So then it will make sure timber is the core issue, and everything will be the rest. So I would really suggest for the group to use a positive term, or if not possible, if you have not one, then there may be a variety of different terms, but let's not use the negative one if we want to change something.
Yeah, so we tried to summarize the question, the ideas that arose from our discussion with stakeholders yesterday, and maybe reformulate them a little bit to make them clear. So we answered the first question about science, and the first, and we have four main issues or topics. The first one is to improve our basic knowledge on diseases that are occurring in forests, because as we discussed a few moments ago, there are thousands or even millions of microbes and viruses that are living in forests and that could be transmitted to human beings, just as we realized with the COVID-19. And so it's very important to know more about them, where they are, how many there are, how risky they are for the human health. So there are some important basic knowledge that we are missing, and also to relate them with the forest composition and management. So this is the first question. The second question is that we, if you remember yesterday what we said about ticks and urticating larvae, it's a play with 4 layers of players. We have the plants, we have the disease vectors, we have their host, and we have their natural enemies. So there are a lot of biotic interaction that can be driven or changed or modified by forest management. And this is important to know more about that, to understand the associated risk of diseases. And the third question that we discussed is that to consider that the disease vectors, they are mobile, they can move from one part to the other of the landscape. For example, the insects, they can fly, or the deer or wild boars, they can run from forest, but also non-forest habitats in the landscape. So it's very important to consider not only the management of the forest, but also the landscape planning and landscape management to deal with those issues. So the second question was about politics, legal and political framework. And what we discussed or confirmed is that there are no clear legal or political framework in terms of diseases in forests, but sometimes there are the possibility to provide access to, prohibit or limit access to public forests in case of danger, just as when you have a fire risk, you close the forest roads. So it could be one option. But the main discussion was around insurance, because maybe forest owners need to cover their responsibility for natural risk in forest, including diseases risk. And the third question that popped up was to maybe think about how to certify the so-called healing forest in terms of risk of diseases, because we need to be sure that of course, they can improve health by visiting or walking or embracing trees, but we also need to be sure that they are not associated diseases risk in that forest. So there is maybe the question of certification there. The third question was about implementation. We went back to the common observation that we need to improve education. Those questions, including education to risk, whether there are risk or no risk in forests associated with diseases. And that should start since young school age to teach children about what they can face when visiting or playing in forests. The second idea for implementation, going back to the main objective of Dr. Forest, is to convert the forest monoculture into forest mixtures, because there are plenty of interesting results showing that it might be a way to mitigate the risk. But we still have to be more concrete in terms of recommendation. for the composition of the mixed forest, because for now it's quite simple. It's like mixing conifers and deciduous trees, but we have heard that some deciduous could be allergenic with the pollen. Some conifers might be hosting more ticks and so on. So it's important to know more about the true composition of the mixed forest we can suggest or advise. And there was also the question of natural regeneration, because by principle they are supposed to be more diverse in terms of species richness, but still we don't have clear scientific results about how naturally regenerated forest would mitigate risk better than planted forest, for example. We identified 3 blind spots concerning that question. The first is to back to my first topic on black box on knowledge, basic knowledge. There are a lot of probably unknown microbes or viruses, and also a lot of non-native species arriving in European forest that we need to detect and identify in order to alert people or try to eradicate them. So it's still a huge effort to make, maybe using new technologies like metabarcoding. There is a question about what would be the effect of not managing forests, like what's associated risk with unmanaged forest, because it's a new, I don't know in Germany, but in France, it's a clear new trend. A lot of people ask for reducing intensity of management, even talk about rewilding, and we know that rewilding would bring more animals that could be vectors of ticks, for example. So what would be the effect of rewilding on the associated disease risk? And there was a final call for maybe more cooperation, maybe more or multidisciplinary work on that question, and more particularly on the relationship between biodiversity and human health, which is quite relevant to the new concept of One Health or Eco Health. And so we may be trying to develop this platform for collaboration. And just to finish my presentation, I would like to inform you about this new initiative, which is called PREZOO, Preventing Zoonotic Disease Emergence, which was following the COVID-19 and the One Planet Summit, where people realized that deforestation might have triggered the epidemics. So it's important to consider how to reduce the risk of emerging new diseases, considering biodiversity conservation and including forest conservation. And so it might be interesting to make a link between Dr. Forest and this new initiative, which is not only a scientific one, but it's more like a multi-actor process. That's what I wanted to show you, and we are open to discussion now.
Even within countries like in Germany, we don't have a good information system about risks associated with forests like disease vectors. So we sometimes even don't know in different countries, states, the state of Lyme borreliosis and so on. So then obviously there might be a need for information exchange. Sorry with the telephone.
Maybe to add on that, we have in France a citizen science program about ticks, where anyone can report on being bitten by a tick, and then it takes photos, and then the information is provided to a group of people that can map where the bites have been made and what species have been seen, and you can even send the tick to a lab which will try to assess associated bacteria and viruses. So it could be interesting to think about expanding that to Europe.
Presentation, and I just have to say that this subject has to be taken really careful, because so many people are afraid of forest and about wild boars, and the wolf is coming, and better we stay at home, it's much more safe. So life has a risk, and this risk makes us lively. So anyway, I think the most dangerous animal in the forest is the tick. And I'm now for 25 years with the groups outside. I'm very much involved in wild kindergarten, forest kindergarten, and forest schools also, who are often outside. And I never faced a severe problems with other animals than ticks. So I think there we have to focus on, and I think there are quite some easy rules where you can minimize the problem. But anyway, it's there for children, of course. It's not so, at least the FSME, what is it in English? The causes from
Lyme disease?
Not the Lyme disease, the
Encephalitis.
Encephalitis.
Yeah.
Is known that it's not so dangerous within the first 12 years, for example. So I think just to be very careful with this subject. Of course, it is an important subject.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Bernd. It's very important to inform people. I mean, if people are aware of the risks, they can cope with it and know that it's not so important in some places, whereas other places it might be more risky to go. I know that a lot of people are afraid of forests in general. They are afraid to get lost. They are afraid about with wild animals. And to me, it's very much a question of education, because I don't know you in Germany, but in France, we have a lot of fairy tales where a young child is abandoned by his parents in the forest, and then he can meet a wolf, and then he can be swallowed by an ogre. And so there are a lot of bad stories about forest. And I think it's a question of education. And so we should try to teach people that there are a lot of benefits from forests, and that there is the fear factor should be released and mitigated by strong education about all the benefits we can gain from forests. Yeah.
Thank you. I would like to just add, as a forest bathing guide, I've noticed that there's a time and a place for that kind of education, and that's not right in front of the walk, but just after, because otherwise the people will be constantly thinking about, is there something creeping on me? So after the walk, it's better to say, please check yourself.
Yes, thank you. Especially thank you, Bernd, for sharing this opinion with us. In addition, I would say the most dangerous animal in the forest are humans and not ticks. At least that's my experience. And there's a lot of expectations on the forest, what this forest is supposed to do for us. And I'd like to remember all of you that within the life of maybe one beech that might last 150 years, we changed our opinion of what to expect from the forest like 100 times. So please don't think that we can turn around forest within the next 10 years just to adapt it for our health. Maybe thinking about that it's more easy to change our opinion about forest because 150 years ago, nobody even thought about entering the forest for recreation or for health or for anything. So it seems to me that it's more easy to educate people. It's more easy to, make people more open-minded than to change the forest. Because, for example, increasing biodiversity in the forest is like a goal of forester for, I don't know, 30 years, 40 years. And we should be patient with the forest because it will take 100 more years to really have this biodiversity. So please be patient with the forest. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. I think it's very much in line with the concept of multifunctionality of forest. And this is where probably diversifying species, tree species would be a good way to provide a large portfolio of options that keep them long enough that will meet the expectation of the current and next generation of people.
In Germany right now, they are popping up cure and healing forests, and they are becoming right now a certification. This is already a process. Is become a legal certification. This is the first one, and the second one, outdoor schooling, is becoming much more popular. Not only because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also there seems to be a need to go outdoor with the kids. And there is an increasing number of green forest classrooms, which have been introduced by the Schutzgemeinschaft Deutscher Wald, and they have transmitted the curricula of the elementary grade 1 to 4 completely to outdoor schooling. So you can do mathematics, outdoor biology, German, sport. You can do everything in this green classroom. And the project goes further. They will also transform the indoor curricula to an outdoor curricula for the 6th to 7th grade right now, and they are working together with teachers, with pedagogics, with forestry person, and every week they will establish 3 new green classrooms in Germany, and this is really popping up. And the most problematic point of this theme might be the parents, because they are not used to dress the kids for outdoor schooling. They need new equipment, and they are maybe afraid of all the sometimes dangerous things like ticks or something else.
Thank you. Interesting information. Going back to certification, there are also the common forest certification like PEFC or FSC. Maybe it would be interesting to discuss with those guys and try to see how we can join efforts to include new indicators for forest certification based on what we know about the effect of forest for human health.
Question is very interesting, but because we mentioned, or Bernd mentioned that so many people are very anxious of going into the forest, I think this is a very interesting notion, considering the fact that forest bathing is especially helpful for mitigating anxiety, right? So I think it will be one of the main challenges to really find ways to make, like, even these people who are very anxious, who score high on neuroticism, to go into the forest and then even mitigate their anxiety. So I think it is very important to really maybe figure out what it is that really drives this anxiety in people, what makes the forest so scary. And that's why I think this could also be like a very interesting research project, for example. And then also referring to what Felix said, I totally agree that we also should never forget that, the forest, we always talk about benefits for human beings, but not benefits for the forest. But the interesting thing is that when people start perceiving the positive effects of nature or like the ecosystems, then this also increases pro-environmental behavior. And I think this is exactly where we should start. It's just like a circular process. So once people are really aware of how they benefit from the forest, this could also lead to much more engagement in forest conservation.
Yeah, I agree. And going back to the fear factor, we made an inquiry in our public forest, and we realized that people were so afraid of even wild animals that they would prefer forests with no understory, so that they can see far away. And so they like very, high forests with not a single shrubs. And this is that can have a strong effect on forest management. And again, also we thought that they would not move further than 100 or 200 meters from the car park and go back. So all of these psychological effects have a true impact on the way they want forests to be managed.
I know that, for example, visibility and transversibility is always important in landscapes. But I mean, moving only 15 minutes from the car park is also for open landscape. I think there has been other research, so it's like, yeah, have a walk for half an hour maximum and then go to the cafe or the ice cream. So that's a normal behavior. It's not just for forests.
Okay. So yesterday we didn't really manage to go through all the questions in the Jamboard because we had a very interesting and intense discussion on how to design the forest walks, and there were a lot of ideas coming from the participants, and they were very helpful. And then later people commented also on the other questions. So to summarize first on what we discussed concerning the forest walks, there were a lot of comments on standardizing conditions, which I remember very well, discussed several times during Dr. Forest meetings, also very intensely and with a lot of energy. And to me, this highlights also the importance that we, as Kevin said already yesterday, that we complement these forest walks with the lab studies. And this is really a very special and unique thing about Dr. Forest, but also about, and then it fits also to the open questions in science topic, how much we still don't know on what actually influences these outcomes we see in forest walks on human health and restoration. So it is really important to standardize conditions as much as possible, and we discussed that the interaction with guides might have an effect, and we should refer to written instructions as much as possible. We were thinking about audio guides, and we had input that there's already some mindfulness paths from the SDV that can be downloaded. So you can actually take this this kind of app or this path to your mobile and go with it to the forest, if I understood correctly, and just apply it everywhere. We should control for physical activity and give at the same time for contemplation, of course, and consider auto-suggestions. That's something that we already discussed in the main group. And then when selecting participants, of course, we have to be very careful to either control for their geographic background or assess their ways of natural relatedness, or at least ideally choose from a broad range of characteristics. So these were the main points. Then after the session yesterday, more ideas came up. For example, that maybe there should be, I don't know, we didn't really discuss it, so I just can say what was written on the Jamboard. So to study medical outcomes of different forest walk programs in Germany. So maybe get more data on this, I think is the idea here. Then in terms of politics, what are legal and political frameworks that help implementation, that help or hinder implementation? So here one thing is that one comment was that there's a political or socio-cultural or maybe even economic issue, that how to really convince people of health benefits in forests and to make them aware that this is actually really good, and how to reach different groups of the populations, like really urban people or like people who are not already very connected to nature. And then there was one comment that came later and that I highlighted here in red, is that also practitioners might not be so open to new concepts of forest and health, or are not really aware of it. And that's even forest ministries and underestimate the importance of forests for public health. And this is maybe a thing that came up now also in the discussions of the other work groups, that this is still a point we need to communicate and to establish more how important that really is. Then ideas for implementation from the group. I think some things came up now, so I can keep this brief. I mean, we talked about poor and healing forests and about different, and how they become more and more, and of different agencies establishing them and criteria getting established for establishing these cure and healing forests. We talked about the need for training and standardizing training for forest therapists and forest and health trainees. So maybe, yeah, one blind spot is what I've discussed already before, is maybe that how we can engage a broader public into the health benefits of forests. Yeah, and I think that was it.
Yeah,
so
thank
far.
you. So this is true. Yeah, Germany, the PFC Germany offers this kind of certification, at least only for a few months now. So this is very new, and I know that they have just one case that is now under observation, where this community wants the certificate, wants to really the certificate for the own forest, and this somehow makes make sure that we are somehow running already in a kind of a competition between different certification schemes. So there is some public processes. So some of the German states are discussing or have already changed their forest acts and do something. There are other associations in the field of the health system who are working on certification schemes, and we have this forestry process in the field of the certification of sustainable forest management. So there's already a situation of competition, and what may somehow lead to a situation of confusion for the consumers, whether they have the same variety of labels that they are somehow used to in other fields of their life. And so it's really a critical time at the moment whether it will be able to really develop a clear situation for the consumers in this field. And I think it is tricky to reach this, as the culture in the field of the health system seems to be different than the culture in the field of the forest system. So within forestry, we have a large tradition of volunteer instruments. So forest owners are used to funding systems, and they are used to volunteer certification schemes, whereas in the health system, the state has a strong role. A lot of things are regulated by detail by the state, and it's now finding certification schemes for cure and healing systems somehow means to bring together these two worlds and to somehow lead to a fusion of these two cultures, if they really should work on the one side concerning the interest of the forest owners who have their culture, and on the other side, they really should convince the health insurances that are used to more these detailed, regulated public systems. And I think this is really the challenge that we have at the moment, if you talk about this kind of certification, to bring together these two cultures.
And I'm really struggling with the PFC certification for healing forest. My concerns are that the medical perspective, especially the perspective of the patients, is not totally covered or not really good integrated in this concept, in my view. What we are trying to establish is really a combination of the medical and as well as the forestry perspective, to find a community to establish this healing forest and the cure forests. And the certification, what I was talking about, is already in the process, and I don't want to talk about it. It's not my process, it's from another state, but I think we need to work together and not to see it's my forest and I will do it in my way, because we are treating patients there. We want to go with the sick people there, and we need to look for the best infrastructure, the best ways we can support the patients there. And that's what I'm really lacking in the PFC for healing forest program. But this is my understanding right now. Maybe you can clarify a little bit more.
Maybe Gisela, you can highlight to us a little bit more, or to me, what patients actually need in a forest. Because my naive idea is like you go in a forest and all is well. So what else do you need when you are a patient in a forest?
I mean, when we are talking about a healing forest, then we go with a really a sick person with a different indication: cardiovascular disease, orthopedic diseases, psychosomatic diseases, burnout diseases, and I need different different preparation of the forest floor. For example, if I have people with a wheelchair, they need a different situation, and then I need a path just for psychosomatic patients. They normally a little bit weak or have a fatigue syndrome. They are weakened, so they have a short distance capacity to walk, and we need sit spots, or we need different we need an adaptation for each different medicine indication. And this is, for me, it's more and more important to become with this healing forest a more inclusive program ability, that we can use this health benefit for a variety of different indications. And it is really it's not easy to establish different programs for it, and all to evaluate the forest by itself, of the infrastructure of the forest, which kind of patients I can enter the forest safely, for example. And this is brand new, so we have to find it out more and more. It's really problematic, because right now we only have cure forests, which are the forests natural based, no change at all, and they are for the prevention and health promotion at all. And the healing forests here right now in Germany, as I understood, and it was decided 2019 at the, or 2017 at this international conference for the opening of the forest healing forest in Usedom, it was joint decided that we call it healing forest. And of course, therapeutic forest is another term, but I don't know if we should implement it too, because it makes much more confusion to get more and more words for the same thing. Maybe
the challenge is to think these certification schemes through the eye of the forest owner, and through the eye of the health insurances, and through the eye of the consumers. And this should somehow fit together. And that's what I wanted to explain with this different culture. So many forest owners are somehow critical because they have some experiences, for example, in the field of biodiversity protection. When Natura 2000 was published, they heard a lot of stories that this will not change anyhow your management. So if you just continue with your management, you will have wonderful future, and the species too. And they learned after 20 years they have to follow very detailed public plans, and this makes forest owners in many cases very critical. And I think it's important to avoid the problems that nature protection policy has made in the 1980s, 1990s during the implementation process of these protected areas at the moment now. And this is, I think, the sympathetic side of a volunteer certification scheme the forest owners are used to develop this. And this is part of the certification. Then it can be changed every few years, and it can adapt it if new ideas come up. And forest owners are used to this, and so they have sustainability as a core idea, and they can add other functions of the forest if they want. And I think this is a strong argument if you want really to win the hearts of the forest owners for this kind of new ideas, that they are implemented with instruments the forest owners are used to and they somehow trust.
Therapist forest, I could imagine that there are also conflicting or trade-offs. Like you cannot design a forest that works equally well for people with cardiovascular problems and people who need to do sports in the forest and people who want to relax and do yoga and have a quiet place and search for a sense of wilderness, and then do also conservation, and then maybe also harvest timber in the same forest. I don't know. So yeah, I think I can imagine it's really tricky to get all this under one head. Yeah.
It's short because I wanted to bring up the same point again, like Sandra just did. And I also think it's well, even in this group, I think everybody has a different picture of a forest for every statement, you know. And what Gisela, what you said about the Therapiewald or forests that are fit for different therapies, it also comes back to the question of scale. How big does a therapy forest have to be to suit your needs or the needs of the patients? And the other thing is more the bathing topic, yeah, forest bathing. That might be a larger scale, and the forest, as we're used to it, we foresters are used to it. We have a picture, also have a different picture in our mind. We also had this aspect of the how far you can look inside between the trees. You know, Uli Schramme. I remember when I was a student in Freiburg, we had in 2005 or something. I heard this study in Mooswald, and people said the most important thing is that there are no shrubs. You can see, so nobody can hide behind any shrubbery. And the second option would be to have street lights along the path through the forest. So maybe this is not a forest after all, but it's a landscape park. Yeah, and even in this group of experts, we are not, we don't have the same pictures in our mind. So maybe this is really the first step to become clearer.